The boy promised his grandmother he would deliver that old letter. The millionaire laughed at him in front of the whole bank. But that crumpled paper carried a truth so powerful it would bring a rich man to his knees. The wet rubber sandals made a squeaking sound on the polished marble of Meridian National Bank. Nolan pushed through the glass door, and a blast of cold air raised the thin hairs on his skinny arms far too thin for an 11-year-old. The floor gleamed so brightly that he could see his own reflection, the faded red t-shirt, the khaki shorts with the pockets stitched by hand, the knees scarred from falls on the dirt field behind his neighborhood. Down there, reflected on that mirror-like floor, Nolan looked even smaller than he was. He pressed the yellowed brown envelope tight against his chest. It was the only thing of value he owned. The entire place smelled of leather and expensive cologne. Dark wooden counters, upholstered armchairs, screens displaying numbers that meant nothing to him. Men and women in elegant clothes walked back and forth, speaking softly, carrying briefcases. Nobody looked at Nolan, or rather, everyone looked, but the wrong way. A clerk behind the counter raised her eyes over the rim of her glasses. "Are you lost, sweetheart?" "No, ma'am, I need to speak with Mr. Malcolm Reinhardt." The woman blinked. "Mr. Malcolm Reinhardt? The chairman of the board?" "Yes, ma'am. I have a letter for him." "Sweetheart, Mr. Reinhardt doesn't receive visitors like this. Do you have a guardian with you?" "My grandmother sent me. It's very important." The clerk exchanged a glance with the colleague beside her. Other clients were already watching. A man in a navy blue suit lowered his newspaper to stare. A woman with a designer handbag whispered something into her companion's ear. "Look, honey, that's just not possible. But if you'd like, you can leave the letter with me and I'll make sure it gets to—" "No." Nolan said it with a firmness that surprised even himself. "My grandmother said it has to be hand-delivered, only to him, in person." The firmness in his voice did not match the size of his body, but it was real, because before the sun had risen that morning, he had made a promise. Dorothy had woken him while it was still dark. She was sitting on the edge of his bed, holding the envelope with both hands, like someone holding a wounded bird. 68 years old, hair completely white and pulled into a tight bun, skin darkened by decades of sun, back curved from carrying the weight of an entire lifetime. After her son passed and his wife followed shortly after, Dorothy was all that remained. Just her. To raise that boy, to keep the house standing, to make sure the family's story did not turn to dust. "Nolan, my grandson, today you're going to do something important, the most important thing I've ever asked of you. This is a letter your father left before he passed. He told me that when the right time came I would know, and the time has come, my boy." "Who is it for, Grandma?" "For a man named Malcolm Reinhardt. He works at that big bank on Central Avenue. Your father and him were like brothers. They built things together. But after your father was gone, that man never showed up again, never looked at us again." Nolan did not understand all of it, but he understood what mattered. His grandmother needed him to be brave. "I'll deliver it, Grandma. I promise." Dorothy held his face with her wrinkled hands. "You're just like your father, you know that? The same courage, the same good heart." Nolan pressed the envelope against his chest and left the house before his grandmother could see that his eyes were wet. Now he was here, inside this bank that felt like another planet, holding the promise with both hands. And the receptionist was already reaching for the phone to call security when the elevator at the back of the lobby opened. Malcolm Reinhardt stepped out as though stepping onto a stage. Tall, grey hair slicked back, dark charcoal suit that looked sewn onto his body, shoes that reflected the light like mirrors. He spoke into his phone with impatience. Behind him, two assistants struggled to keep pace. He was 62 years old and carried the kind of presence that made people straighten their posture. He had built his fortune in finance, and Meridian National Bank was just one of his properties. Malcolm Reinhardt measured people by their bank balance, and by that stick almost everyone fell short. Nolan recognized the face. His grandmother had shown him an old photograph where two young men stood smiling side by side in front of an unfinished building. "The one on the right is Malcolm," Dorothy had explained, "and the one on the left, with the wide smile, that's your father." Nolan walked straight toward him. "Mr. Reinhardt." The boy's thin voice cut across the entire lobby. Malcolm stopped walking, the phone still at his ear. He looked down at this skinny kid who had materialized in front of him, as though sprouting from the marble floor. "What?" The word came out sharp as broken glass. "Sir, my name is Nolan. I have a letter for you. It's from my father." Malcolm pulled the phone from his ear. He looked the boy up and down, the worn sandals, the patched shorts, the faded t-shirt, the dirty envelope in his hands. His eyes made a swift and merciless assessment. "A letter," he repeated, incredulous. "From your father?" "Yes, sir. He left it before he passed away. My grandmother asked me to deliver it to you personally." One of the assistants stepped forward, trying to intercept. "Mr. Reinhardt, I can handle this." Malcolm raised his hand, silencing the assistant, but not out of interest in the letter, out of amusement. There was something absurdly comical about the scene. A ragged boy invading the bank to deliver a battered envelope. "Stand down, Bradley. I want to see this." Malcolm crossed his arms and looked at Nolan with a smile that held nothing kind. "So your father left me a letter, and he sent you dressed like that to come deliver it?" "My grandmother sent me, sir." "Your grandmother?" Malcolm glanced around. There were at least 15 people watching. He loved an audience. "And what does this letter say, that I've won a prize?" "I don't know, sir. I didn't read it. My grandmother said it's only for you." "Oh, it's only for me. What an honor." Malcolm took the envelope with the tips of his fingers, as though picking up something filthy. He turned it one way, then the other. The paper was yellowed, wrinkled at the edges, with the name Malcolm written by hand. "This thing looks like it came out of the trash." A clerk near the counter covered her mouth with her hand. A client in a beige suit looked away, but nobody said anything. Nobody ever said anything to Malcolm Reinhardt. Nolan felt his face burn, but he did not drop his gaze. He remembered his grandmother's words. "No matter what he says, you stand firm. Your father would." "Sir, this letter is important. My father kept it before he—" "Important!" Malcolm let out a laugh that echoed through the marble lobby. "Kid, I receive documents worth millions of dollars every single day. Contracts, deeds, international proposals. And you come here telling me this piece of old paper is important." He raised the envelope in the air, displaying it for everyone like a ridiculous trophy. "Are you all seeing this?" He addressed the people around him. "Is this how things work now? Anyone just walks in and demands my attention?" An older woman with auburn hair sitting in the waiting area shook her head in disapproval. The nearest security guard shifted his weight from one foot to the other. One of the tellers stopped typing, mouth hanging open. "Sir, please just read the letter." Nolan's voice came out smaller than he wanted, but it did not tremble. "My grandmother is sick. She asked me to deliver it to your hands." Something crossed Malcolm's face for a fraction of a second. A shadow. Perhaps recognition, perhaps discomfort. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by pride. "Kid, let me explain something to you." He leaned toward Nolan, and the boy caught the overpowering scent of expensive cologne. "I don't read letters from people I don't know. I don't accept dirty envelopes, and I certainly don't waste my time with sad little stories from people who walk in here thinking I owe them something." Each sentence was precise, cold, designed to diminish. "But you knew my father. His name was—" "I don't care what his name was." Malcolm's voice rose, slicing the air like a whip. The entire lobby froze. "You are interrupting serious people. Look around you, kid. Look where you are. Look at yourself. Do you think you belong in this place?" Nolan looked around. He saw the suits, the polished shoes, the expensive watches, the faces that turned away from his, and for a moment he felt that maybe the man was right. But then he pressed the envelope against his chest. He felt the rough paper against his thin shirt, and he remembered his grandmother's hands holding that same envelope with such care. "I made a promise to my grandmother," he said quietly, but with a steadiness that made Malcolm's smile falter for 1 second. "And I'm not leaving until I keep it." The silence that followed was so dense you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. The receptionist's eyes were wide. The client in the beige suit was wringing his hands. The auburn-haired woman watched Nolan with an expression that mixed pain and admiration. Malcolm stood still, staring at this boy who refused to break. Nobody stood up to Malcolm like this. Employees trembled, partners backed down, and here was a kid in torn sandals, holding an old envelope saying he would not leave. "Bradley," he called his assistant without taking his eyes off Nolan. "Call security." "Mr. Reinhardt, now." 2 security guards approached. Nolan felt his whole body go cold, but he did not step back. He planted his worn sandals on that gleaming marble and held the envelope with both hands. The older guard looked at the boy with something that resembled sorrow. He had seen Malcolm Reinhardt belittle many people in this bank, but never a child. "Come on, son," he said softly. "Better go now." "But I need to deliver the letter." "I know, but now's not the time." Nolan looked at the security guard, then at Malcolm. The millionaire had already turned his back and was walking toward the executive corridor, phone pressed to his ear, as though the boy had already ceased to exist. And then something happened that nobody expected. The envelope slipped from Nolan's hands. It hit the marble with a dry sound, and as it fell, it partially opened, revealing not just a folded letter, but an old photograph that slid across the polished floor, stopping almost at Malcolm's feet. The auburn-haired woman saw it first, then the teller, then Bradley. One by one, every pair of eyes converged on that photo on the ground. Malcolm stopped walking, not because someone asked him to, but because Bradley, wide-eyed, touched his shoulder and pointed down. The photograph showed two young men side by side, smiling, standing before an unfinished building. One of them was unmistakably Malcolm Reinhardt, decades younger, without the grey hair, without the armor of power. And beside him, arm draped over his shoulder, stood a man with a wide smile and kind eyes. The same eyes that were now staring up at him, in a smaller, younger version, standing in the middle of a bank lobby that existed because of that very smile. Malcolm looked at the photo, then at Nolan, then at the photo. And for the first time in many years, the most powerful man in that bank did not know what to say. Nolan picked up the envelope from the floor with trembling hands, slipped the photo back inside and said only, "You did know my father, sir, and he never forgot about you." He turned around and walked toward the glass door, his sandals making a muffled sound on the marble. Behind him, the lobby remained in shock. The receptionist had tears in her eyes. The older security guard swallowed hard. The auburn-haired woman pressed her purse against her chest, and Malcolm Reinhardt stood motionless, frozen, with an expression no one in that bank had ever seen on his face. Fear. Because in that instant, watching the back of that boy walking away with a dignity he himself had never possessed, Malcolm Reinhardt began to suspect something terrible, that that paper was worth more than his entire fortune, and that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Nolan did not cry at the bank, not on the bus, not during the walk down the dirt road. He held everything inside the way his grandmother taught him, breathing slowly, pressing the envelope against his chest. He cried when he opened the rusty gate and saw Dorothy sitting in the plastic chair in the backyard, waiting. The three plant pots around her, hands in her lap, gaze fixed on the gate as though she had not moved since he left. Grandma. She saw her grandson's face and understood everything. She stood slowly, leaning on the chair because her knees no longer obeyed without complaint, and opened her arms. Nolan ran and buried his face in his grandmother's thin shoulder. The sobs shook his entire body. She held him tight, rocking gently the way she used to when he was a baby. "He didn't want it, Grandma, didn't want the letter. He laughed at me, laughed in front of everyone." "I know, my boy. He said he didn't know my father. He lied, Grandma. I saw the photo." They were together, smiling. Dorothy closed her eyes. An old pain crossed her face like a cloud covering the sun. Not surprise, confirmation. She had always known Malcolm Reinhardt was capable of denying, of pretending, of erasing the past the way someone tears a page from a notebook. "Come inside, son. You need to eat something." "I don't want to eat. I want to know the truth. What did my father have with that man?" The question hung in the air. Dorothy looked at her grandson, at the wet eyes that were an exact copy of her son's, and realized the time to protect him from the story was over. "Sit here with me," she said, pointing to the step by the front door. "Your father's name was Patrick. Patrick Silver. He was a bricklayer, the finest bricklayer this city has ever seen. Every wall he raised came out perfect, straight, solid." Her voice was soft but steady. "When Malcolm Reinhardt was young, he had nothing, lived in a tiny rented room, ate once a day. Big dreams, but not a single penny to start. And how did he meet my father? At a construction site. Your father was working on a building. Malcolm showed up looking for a job. The foreman didn't want to give him a chance, but Patrick stepped in. Said every man deserves at least one opportunity." Nolan looked at the envelope in his hands, the worn edges, the name Malcolm in his father's handwriting. "Your father didn't just give Malcolm a job, he gave him friendship. When Malcolm got sick, Patrick paid for the medicine. When Malcolm had the idea of opening a construction supply business, it was Patrick who scraped together every cent of the family savings and placed it in his hands." "The family savings?" "Our savings. All of it." Dorothy's voice trembled for the first time. "I begged him not to, said it was too risky. But your father had something I could never change. He trusted people. Believed that if you did good, good would come back. And what happened? The business took off. Malcolm was smart, knew how to sell, how to negotiate. But the one who built every wall of that first warehouse was your father, with his own hands, for free, because they were friends, because Malcolm promised they would share everything. And he didn't share. It was not a question. It was a statement. And the weight of that sentence made Dorothy close her eyes for a moment. When the business started growing, Malcolm changed. Better clothes, a different neighborhood, new friends. Your father still visited, still treated him like a brother, but Malcolm kept pulling away. And my father didn't do anything. Your father was too proud to demand what was owed. He used to say that true friendship doesn't need collecting, that Malcolm would come back when he was ready. Dorothy wiped her face with the back of her hand. He never came back. The silence between grandmother and grandson was heavy as lead. From the street came the sounds of the village, dogs barking, children playing. But there on that doorstep, the world belonged only to the two of them and a story that ached. When your father got sick, I sent 3 letters to Malcolm asking for help. He was already very rich. No response. Your father kept getting worse, and I had no money for treatment. Sold everything I had, it wasn't enough. Nolan felt his throat close. He knew how the story ended, but he needed to hear it. And my mother. Dorothy squeezed her grandson's hand. Your mother was a woman of light, strong. She loved your father like I've never seen anyone love. When he was gone, something inside her went dark. She left us shortly after. Nolan looked at the sky, blue, cloudless, indifferent to the pain beneath it. And this letter, Grandma? What did my father write? Dorothy hesitated. It was the first time Nolan had ever seen her hesitate like that, as if the words were too large for her mouth. I don't know, my boy. Never read it. Your father sealed the envelope and asked me to deliver it to Malcolm when the time came. And now, with this illness wearing me down, I feel the time is now. Don't talk like that, Grandma. I will, because it's the truth. She touched the envelope with her fingertips. This letter is the last voice of your father. It needs to reach where he wanted it to go. Nolan looked at his grandmother, at the wrinkles that told decades of labor, at the hands that trembled with exhaustion, at the eyes that still shone despite everything. I'm going back there, Grandma, and this time he's going to read it. I know you will, my boy. On the other side of the city, in a mansion surrounded by high walls, Malcolm Reinhardt could not sleep. He was in his study, the desk lamp casting shadows on the mahogany walls. On the desk, between contracts, sat a glass of whiskey half finished, and on his phone screen, a photo that Bradley had discreetly taken at the bank, the photograph of 2 young men smiling. Malcolm enlarged the image, stared at his own face from decades ago. Beside it, the man he had tried to erase from memory for far too long. Patrick. The name echoed in his mind like a bell in an empty town. Malcolm walked to the panoramic window. Everything here was expensive. The sculpted hedges, the heated pool, everything built upon the foundation of a betrayal he had never admitted, because the truth was simple. And because it was simple, it was unbearable. Patrick Silver had been the first person to believe in him, the man who shared the little he had, who worked for free, who gave every penny so Malcolm could begin, and Malcolm had repaid him with silence, with deliberate forgetting. When the money started coming in, shame arrived with it, shame of owing everything to a humble bricklayer who never asked for anything. And because he did not know how to handle the shame, he turned it into distance, then into denial. He convinced himself he had built everything alone, lied to himself so many times that the lie became truth. Until that morning, until that boy in torn sandals appeared in the bank lobby, holding an envelope with his name on it. His phone rang. It was Bradley. Mr. Reinhardt, forgive the hour. I looked into the boy. Nolan Silver, 11 years old, lives with his grandmother, Dorothy Silver, South District. The grandmother is sick, heart problems. The boy attends public school. There's no one else. Malcolm closed his eyes. And the father? Patrick Silver. Passed almost 11 years ago. The mother passed shortly after. Silence. Bradley, keep this to yourself. But sir, what are you going to do? Malcolm did not answer. He hung up, finished the whiskey in one swallow, and stared at the photo until the screen went dark. The next morning, when he arrived at Meridian National Bank, something unexpected was waiting. The older security guard was waiting with an expression different from his usual deference. Good morning, Mr. Reinhardt. Good morning. Sir, there's a man waiting in the conference room. He said you'll want to hear what he has to say about the boy from yesterday. Malcolm felt his stomach drop. Who is he? A Mr. Harold Simmons says he's a lawyer, represents the Silver family. The Silver family. The surname struck Malcolm like lightning. He walked to the conference room with steps that tried to appear steady, but trembled inside. Opened the door. Harold Simmons sat at the table, his back to the window. Around 65, completely white hair, thin-framed glasses, a simple but impeccable suit. He did not carry the arrogance of the expensive lawyers Malcolm knew. He had a serenity that was unsettling. Before him lay a brown leather folder with the initials P.S. engraved on the cover. Patrick Silver. Mr. Reinhardt. Harold stood and extended his hand. The handshake was firm and dry. Thank you for seeing me. I didn't agree to see you. You showed up. Fair enough. A brief smile crossed the lawyer's face. I'll be direct, Mr. Reinhardt. I was Patrick Silver's lawyer and personal friend for 15 years. I stood beside him when he married, when his son was born, and when he fell ill and passed. Malcolm did not sit. He stood with his arms crossed, his armor raised. And what does that have to do with me? Everything. Harold opened the folder. Inside were yellowed documents, receipts, handwritten contracts. Patrick came to me months before he passed. He was worried about Dorothy, about his son who was about to be born. He wanted me to safeguard proof of what you two built together. The word proof made Malcolm go pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Harold raised his eyes. His gaze was calm but sharp as a scalpel. Mr. Reinhardt, I've been here for 40 minutes. I waited because I believe every person deserves the chance to do the right thing. But don't mistake my patience for naivety. He pulled a document from the folder, a handwritten receipt with a date, an amount, and 2 signatures. This is the record of the savings Patrick transferred to fund your first venture, signed by both of you, notarized. Malcolm looked at the paper, recognized his own handwriting, young, shaky with the emotion of that distant day when a friend entrusted him with everything. That doesn't prove anything. It was a loan. I paid it back. You didn't. I have the full bank statement from Patrick's account up to the day he died. No deposit of a matching amount was ever recorded. The air in the room turned heavy. Malcolm felt the walls closing in. But I didn't come here to collect money, Harold continued, his voice shifting, softer, almost fatherly. I came because yesterday an 11-year-old boy walked into this bank to keep a promise, and walked out humiliated. This family has suffered far too much to suffer more. I didn't humiliate anyone. Mr. Reinhardt. Harold removed his glasses and placed them on the table. His eyes revealed something Malcolm did not expect. Sadness. I was in the bank yesterday, sitting in the waiting area. I saw everything. Malcolm felt the floor vanish beneath him. You... I saw the boy ask politely to deliver the letter. I saw you laugh. I saw you hold the envelope like a trophy. I saw you call security to remove a child who only wanted to fulfill his father's last wish. I didn't know who he was. You did. The reply was direct, without cruelty but without mercy. You saw the photograph. I watched the color drain from your face. You knew exactly who that boy was. And still you turned your back. Malcolm leaned against the table. His legs could no longer sustain the lie. What do you want from me? What Patrick wanted? For you to read the letter, that's all. Read what that boy tried to deliver. The rest is between you and your conscience. Harold closed the folder, stood and left a business card on the table. When you're ready, contact me. But don't wait too long, Mr. Reinhardt. Dorothy doesn't have much time, and that boy has waited 11 years for something you've owed since before he was born. He left the room without looking back. Malcolm sat alone. On the table, the lawyer's card. On his phone, the photo of 2 young men who were once friends. And somewhere in the South District, a boy pressed an envelope against his chest, swearing to his sick grandmother that he would go back. Malcolm Reinhardt had built an empire on a debt he never repaid. And now, for the first time, the debt had a face. It had a name. It was 11 years old, and it was not giving up. Dorothy woke up worse that morning. Nolan noticed before he even entered her room. He heard the heavy breathing through the thin wall, a wheezing that had not been there the night before. He found his grandmother sitting up in bed, her back propped against 2 stacked pillows, one hand pressed to her chest. Grandma, are you okay? I'm fine, son. Just the usual tiredness. It was not the usual tiredness. Over the past months, it had turned into shortness of breath, swollen legs, Nights sitting up because lying down felt like drowning. The clinic doctor said her heart was weak, that she needed tests and medications the public pharmacy did not carry. "Grandma, I'm going again today." Dorothy raised her eyes. She did not need to ask where. "Nolan, you said yourself this letter needs to get there, and I promised." "I know you promised, but that man, the way he treated you—" "He'll read it, Grandma, this time he will." There was something different in the boy's voice, not anger, not stubbornness. A decision made in a deep place where promises do not break. Dorothy recognized that steadiness. She had seen it in her son's eyes whenever Patrick truly decided something. "Go with God, my grandson." Nolan placed the envelope inside a plastic bag to protect it from the rain. He wore the best clothes he had, a light blue shirt from the church bazaar, jeans without patches, the same sandals. Combed his hair with water. He did not look different, but he felt different. The bus downtown took almost an hour. Nolan watched through the window as bare cinder-block houses gave way to glass towers reflecting the grey sky. The closer he got to Meridian National Bank, the cleaner and quieter everything became. He stepped off at the same stop, walked the same sidewalk, stood before the same glass door. This time he did not hesitate. He pushed through and entered. The cold air, the marble. The receptionist recognized him immediately and reached for the internal phone. Nolan walked straight to the counter. "Good morning. I need to speak with Mr. Malcolm Reinhardt." "Sweetheart, I already explained last time that—" "I know, but I need to deliver the letter. My grandmother is sick and I promised." The clerk opened her mouth to respond, but a hand settled on Nolan's shoulder. The boy turned. It was the older security guard, the same one who had walked him out days before. His face was serious, but his eyes said something else. "Come with me, son." "Are you going to make me leave again?" "No. Come with me." The guard walked ahead, past the main lobby, turning into a corridor Nolan had never seen. They stopped before a dark wooden door with a gold plaque. "Conference room. Executive suite. Wait here." The guard knocked, opened the door and stepped inside. Nolan heard muffled voices. Seconds later, the man returned. "Go in." Nolan swallowed hard, gripped the envelope, walked in. The room was large. Glass table, leather chairs, panoramic window showing the city. At the head, standing with his tie loosened, was Malcolm Reinhardt. Beside him, Harold Simmons. The two had been talking. Nolan could feel it in the air, dense as if the walls had absorbed heavy words. Malcolm looked at the boy, and Nolan saw something that had not been there the first time. Not anger, not mockery, something he could not name, but that his grandmother would have called a guilty conscience. "Mr. Reinhardt," Nolan said, his voice steady despite his trembling legs. "I came back." Silence. "Last time you didn't want to listen. You laughed at me, had security walk me out. But this letter is from my father. He wrote it before he died. My grandmother asked me to put it in your hands." He extended the envelope. His hands shook, but they did not pull back. "I don't know what's written inside. My grandmother doesn't either. My father sealed it and said it was for you. Only for you." Harold said nothing. He simply watched, but there was a moisture in his eyes that had not been there before. Malcolm stared at the envelope. At the handwriting he recognized even after all these years. The capital M that Patrick shaped, with an elegant curve that did not match the hands of a bricklayer. "Please, sir." Nolan's voice cracked for the first time. "It's the last thing my father left behind." Malcolm extended his hand. His fingers trembled. He took the envelope. The paper weighed almost nothing, but in his hands it seemed to carry the weight of the world. He looked at Harold, who simply nodded. He opened the envelope carefully, removed a sheet folded in three, unfolded it. The handwriting was Patrick's, firm at the beginning, shaky at the end, written by a man who knew his time was running out. Malcolm began reading in silence. But Harold spoke. "Read it aloud, Mr. Reinhardt. The boy deserves to hear his father's voice." Malcolm looked at Nolan, at the dark eyes that were a perfect copy of Patrick's. He swallowed the knot in his throat and began to read. "Malcolm, my brother." The first line made his voice break. He breathed deep, continued. "If you're reading this, it means I'm already gone. And it means my mother managed to keep the promise I made her, to guard this letter until the right moment. I'm not writing to collect anything. I never collected, and I won't start now. The money I gave you, the walls I raised, the nights we worked together in that cold warehouse, I did all of it out of friendship. Because you were my brother in spirit, and brothers don't collect debts." Malcolm stopped. His eyes burned. The letters swam on the page. "But I need to ask you one thing, just one. I have a son, Malcolm. By the time you read this, he will have been born. I won't get to see his face, won't see his first steps, hear his first words, walk him to school for the first time. That breaks my heart more than any disease." Malcolm's voice was now a thread. Nolan stood motionless, eyes fixed, absorbing every word the way someone drinks water after crossing a desert. "My son will grow up without a father, and life will be hard on him, because life is hard on those who have no protection. My mother will do what she can, but she already carries too much weight. So I ask you, Malcolm, look after him. It doesn't have to be much, doesn't have to be money. Just look. Every now and then go see how he's doing. If he needs something you can give it. If he needs a word, speak it. If he needs someone to show him what it means to be a good man in this world, be that person. Do you owe me this? No. I tell you from the heart, you owe me nothing. But I'm asking as a brother, as a friend, as someone who believed in you when nobody else did." Malcolm could not continue. The paper shook so violently in his hands that Harold stood and placed a hand on his arm. "Go on, Malcolm, almost done. I know you changed. I know you grew distant. I know you may feel ashamed of where you came from, of what we went through together. But I want you to know something. I was never ashamed of you, never. To me, you were always that young man who showed up at the construction site asking for a chance. And I will always be the bricklayer who gave you that chance. I'm not angry, Malcolm. I miss you. I miss my friend. I miss the man you were before money changed everything. Take care of my son. That's all I ask. With love, Patrick." The silence that followed was of a kind Nolan had never experienced. Not the heavy silence of the bank when Malcolm mocked him. Not the sad silence of the kitchen when Dorothy told the story. This was a silence that seemed to hold everything. Pain, regret, love, loss, truth. Malcolm Reinhardt collapsed into the chair. The paper fell onto the table. He covered his face with both hands and sobbed, not the contained tears of a powerful man trying to maintain composure. The sobs of a broken man confronted with the exact dimension of what he had wasted. 11 years. 11 years in which that boy grew up without a father, without a mother, raised by a sick grandmother. 11 years Malcolm could have watched over him, fulfilled the only request of a man who gave everything. And he did nothing. Nolan stood still. He had never seen an adult cry like that, as if something inside was splitting apart beyond repair. So he did the only thing he knew when someone was suffering, what his grandmother always did for him. He walked to Malcolm and touched his arm. "Sir, don't cry like that." Malcolm raised his face, eyes red, devastated, and met the boy's gaze, calm, without anger. Patrick's eyes looking at him with something that seemed impossible after everything. Compassion. "My father didn't write that letter to make you suffer," Nolan said, with a wisdom that did not match his age. "He wrote it because he trusted you." The word trusted struck Malcolm like nothing before. Not Harold's documents, not the photo on the bank floor, not the sleepless nights. That single word in the mouth of that boy was the heaviest thing he had ever carried. "I don't deserve that trust," Malcolm whispered. "Maybe not. But my father thought you did, and so did my grandmother. Otherwise she wouldn't have sent me here." Harold, who had watched everything in silence with tears running down his weathered face, finally spoke. "Patrick told me once that the true character of a man doesn't show when things are going well. It shows when he has to choose between pride and what is right." Malcolm looked at the lawyer, then at Nolan, then at the open letter on the table. "What do I do now?" It was Nolan who answered. Simple, direct, the way Dorothy would have answered. "Come meet my grandmother. She's waited a long time." The sentence hung in the air like a door opening after years locked shut. Malcolm looked through the window. The city stretched below. And in a village on the outskirts, a woman of 68 with a weak heart was waiting for a visit that should have happened 11 years ago. "Dorothy," he murmured the name like a forgotten prayer. "Is she very sick?" "She is. Her heart." Nolan did not embellish. He did not need to. The simple truth was more powerful than any dramatization. Malcolm stood, wiped his face with the back of his hand, straightened his tie. An automatic gesture, but without the arrogance of before. He looked at Nolan with eyes that seemed to truly see the boy for the first time. "Take me to her." 3 words. But as he spoke them, Malcolm felt as though he had released a weight carried for decades, not relief, the beginning of something he could not name, something that involved facing every truth he had spent a lifetime avoiding. Harold stood and placed his hand on Malcolm's shoulder. Patrick would be glad. Patrick would be furious with me. Perhaps. But he'd also forgive you. Because that's who he was. Nolan tucked the letter back into the envelope with care. That paper now had a voice. It had opened a door locked for over a decade. When they walked out, the lobby was busy. But something shifted when people saw Malcolm Reinhardt walking beside that boy. The older security guard, standing near the door, watched them pass. He looked at Nolan. The boy looked back and for the first time since he had set foot in that bank, smiled. The guard nodded, a small gesture, but it said everything. Outside, the rain that had threatened all morning had passed without falling. The sun broke through the clouds in wide beams. Malcolm looked at his imported car in the reserved spot, then at Nolan in sandals, holding the envelope. "You took the bus?" "Yes, sir." "We'll take my car, it's faster." Nolan had never been inside a car like that, but he showed no amazement. He sat down, buckled his seatbelt, and pointed the way. On the way out of the parking garage, Malcolm asked, "Your father, did he ever talk about me?" "I don't know, sir. I never knew my father." The simple sentence carried the weight of 11 entire years. Malcolm gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He said nothing more during the drive, simply followed the boy's directions as the polished city gave way to humble neighborhoods, and humble neighborhoods gave way to a dirt road leading to a faded yellow house with 3 plant pots in the yard, and a grandmother waiting at the gate. The imported car stopped on the dirt road. Malcolm Reinhardt sat with his hands on the steering wheel, staring at the faded yellow house. So small it would fit inside his garage, the paint peeling around the windows, the roof patched with mismatched tiles. But the 3 plant pots were immaculate, red and purple flowers insisting that beauty does not need money. Nolan opened the car door and stepped out. He looked back at Malcolm, who had not moved. "Are you coming, sir?" Malcolm took a deep breath. He had dined with ambassadors and closed deals in rooms that cost more than entire neighborhoods, but he had never been so afraid to walk through a gate as he was in that moment. Yes. He stepped out. His Italian leather shoes sank into the soft earth. He did not care. He followed Nolan through the rusty gate, across the tiny yard to the front door that stood slightly open. Dorothy was not in the yard chair. Nolan found her in the kitchen, preparing coffee with trembling hands. When she heard the footsteps, she turned. And when she saw Malcolm Reinhardt standing in the doorway of her kitchen, the entire world seemed to pause. She recognized him. Even with the grey hair and wrinkles, she recognized the young man who once ate at her table and called Patrick brother. "Malcolm." The name came out as a whisper. There was no anger, no accusation, something far more complex, a mixture of relief, old pain, and a weariness that came from carrying alone a weight that should have been shared. "Dorothy." Malcolm's voice sounded foreign even to himself. Small, without the armor he usually wore. I came. "I can see that." She leaned against the kitchen counter. Her fingers gripped the edge as though she needed something solid to keep from falling. "Sit down. The coffee is almost ready." "You don't have to." "I want to. In my house, guests drink coffee." Malcolm sat at the small table. The plastic chair creaked. Everything around him was simple, worn, but spotlessly clean. Pans gleaming on the wall, cement floor swept, a picture of a saint taped up with yellowed adhesive. Nolan sat beside his grandmother, watching her every movement. He monitored her breathing, her steps, the steadiness of her hands. He had learned to be Dorothy's silent guardian long before any child should need to learn that. She served coffee in 3 mugs that did not match, sat down slowly in the chair across from Malcolm, looking directly at him. There were decades in that gaze, entire stories compressed into seconds of silence. "Nolan told me what happened at the bank. The first time and the second?" Malcolm lowered his eyes to the mug. "Dorothy, I have no way to explain what I did. There is no justification. I'm not asking for justification. I'm looking at you. I want to see if there's anything left of the young man who sat in this same kitchen and shared beans with my son." The sentence was a scalpel. It cut without violence, but went deep. "I've changed a great deal, Dorothy. Everyone changes. The question is which direction." She took a sip of coffee. Her hands trembled, but her gaze was firm as stone. "My son loved you like a brother, shared everything. The little he had, he shared. When you needed money to start, he didn't think twice. gathered everything we had saved over years and placed it in your hand. I know. Do you? Then you know that when my son got sick, I sent letters asking for help. 3 letters, written in my own hand, with tears falling on the paper, asking not for money, asking you to come, to visit your friend before it was too late. Malcolm felt each word like a burning coal in his chest. No response. My son asked every single day, "Mama, did Malcolm send anything?" And I lied. Told him the letter must have gotten lost in the mail, because the truth was too cruel for a man already leaving this world. "Dorothy, he died asking for you." Her voice did not tremble. It was the voice of someone who had already cried every possible tear, and now only the dry, naked truth remained, impossible to soften. The last week, when he couldn't get out of bed anymore, he told me, "Mama, when Malcolm comes, give him the letter." When? Not if. When? Because until the very end, he believed you would come. The silence was so deep that Nolan could hear his own heartbeat. He looked between his grandmother and Malcolm, trying to grasp the full weight of it all. He understood more than any child should need to understand. Malcolm rested his elbows on the table and covered his face. His shoulders shook. There was nowhere left to hide. No offices, no assistants, no security guards, no glass walls. Here in this cement kitchen with a mug of coffee before him and a woman of 68 who looked at him without hatred, he was completely exposed. "I was ashamed," he said, his voice muffled by his hands. "Ashamed of what I used to be. Ashamed of owing everything to a bricklayer. When the money came, I wanted to erase the past, pretend I built it all alone, and to pretend I had to erase you, erase Patrick, erase everything. And did you manage?" "No." The word came out like a sob. "Never. Every night, every building I put up, every deal I closed, Patrick was there, in my head, asking me why." Dorothy was silent for a moment. Then she reached across the table, her hand calloused, veins raised, the hand that had cleaned houses, raised a grandson, held a dying son. She placed that hand over Malcolm's. He looked up, stunned. He had expected accusation, expected fury, perhaps even a slap, which would have been deserved, but a touch of compassion was the last thing he expected. "I already forgave you, Malcolm, a long time ago." "How? After everything?" "Because holding on to anger would have destroyed me, and I had a grandson to raise. I couldn't afford to be consumed by bitterness, so I placed it all in God's hands and asked for strength to keep going. You shouldn't forgive me, I don't deserve it. Maybe not, but forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about choosing peace over the war inside yourself." Nolan watched his grandmother with shining eyes. Here was the woman who raised him, who taught him everything, who carried the entire world on her back without ever losing her kindness. And she was offering forgiveness to the man who had abandoned them. Malcolm looked at the two of them, grandmother and grandson, bound by a love nothing had broken. He thought of his empty mansion, his wife who barely knew him, his employees who feared him. He owned an empire and was utterly alone. Here in this house that would fit in his garage, there was more wealth than in all his accounts combined. "I read Patrick's letter," he said. "I read what he asked, to look after Nolan. I know, Nolan told me. I failed. For 11 years, I failed. But I want to make it right. I know I can't return the time, can't bring Patrick back. But I want to do what he asked. I want to take care." Dorothy studied him with a mother's gaze that sees beyond words. "Take care how?" "Whatever you and Nolan need. Medical treatment. School, whatever it takes. I don't want your money, Malcolm. I know you don't, but you need it, and Nolan deserves it. My grandson already has everything he needs. A roof, food, and love. He does. But he doesn't have access to a doctor who can properly treat your heart. Doesn't have a pair of shoes. Doesn't have the chance to study without worrying whether there'll be dinner." The words were hard, but not cruel. Malcolm was, for the first time, being honest without being aggressive, describing reality without humiliating. Dorothy was silent. She looked at Nolan, at the worn sandals, at the bizarre shirt, at the eyes that, despite everything, still shone. "I won't accept charity. It's not charity. It's a debt I should have paid long ago. Patrick never wanted you to pay anything." "I know. But sometimes the debt isn't financial, it's human. And this one I need to pay, Dorothy, not out of obligation, because I finally understand it's the right thing." She looked at him for a long moment, searching for something. Perhaps sincerity. Perhaps the ghost of the young man who once sat in that very chair. "I'll accept. but with one condition. What? That you don't do it out of guilt. That you do it because you want to. Because you looked at my grandson and saw in him what my son saw in you when he gave you that chance at the construction site. Because if it's guilt, it won't last. Guilt fades. But when you do good, because you want to, because you understand the other person's worth, that lasts forever. Malcolm nodded. The condition was heavier than any contract he had ever signed. I promise. Don't promise me. Promise Patrick. Malcolm looked at the picture on the wall, then at Nolan, at the eyes that carried his lost friend's gaze. I promise, Patrick. The words came out hoarse, broken, but true. And in that simple kitchen, before a mug of coffee and a woman who deserved the world, Malcolm Reinhardt made the first honest promise in decades. Dorothy smiled, but the next second, the smile dissolved. She pressed her hand to her chest. Her eyes went wide. Her breathing seized. Grandma! Nolan leaped from his chair. Dorothy doubled over, her hand clenching her chest, the color draining from her face. The mug fell from the table and shattered on the cement floor, dark coffee spreading like a shadow. Dorothy! Malcolm stood, knocking the chair over. She tried to speak, but the air would not come. Her lips trembled. Her eyes found Nolan with a desperation the boy had never seen in his grandmother. She, the fortress, the rock, the woman who never showed weakness, was crumbling. Nolan caught his grandmother, keeping her from falling off the chair. Her body was cold, shaking. Mr. Malcolm, please, help! Malcolm did not think, did not calculate. He lifted Dorothy in his arms as though she weighed nothing, and she weighed so little that body worn from so much labor, and ran to the car. Nolan opened the back door. Malcolm laid her on the seat with care, her head resting on her grandson's lap. Hold her. Don't let her head drop. Grandma, hold on, please hold on. Malcolm started the engine. The tires screamed on the dirt. The motor roared down the narrow street, scattering dogs and drawing neighbors to their windows. Nolan held his grandmother with both arms. He felt her breathing, faint, broken, each inhale a battle. Her hands, those hands that had held him his entire life, now clutched his shirt as though he were the last thing anchoring her to the world. Grandma, look at me. I'm here. Don't close your eyes. Dorothy looked at her grandson, and even in that moment, even with her heart failing, she smiled. Faint, trembling, but she smiled. My boy. Don't talk, Grandma. Save your strength. Malcolm drove like never before, ran signals, leaned on the horn, jumped curbs. The man who days ago had ordered guards to remove a child from his bank was now tearing across the city to save that child's grandmother. He glanced in the rearview mirror, saw Nolan cradling Dorothy, the boy's face wet with silent tears, his lips murmuring something that sounded like a prayer, and in that instant, Malcolm Reinhardt understood something all the millions in the world could not buy. That the paper that boy had brought to the bank was worth more than his entire fortune, because it did not contain a demand. It contained love. The love of a father who, even while dying, thought of others before himself. The nearest hospital appeared on the corner. Malcolm braked at the emergency entrance, jumped out and shouted for help. I need a doctor. It's her heart. Nurses came with a stretcher. They lifted Dorothy from the car. Nolan tried to follow, but a nurse held him back. Let us work, sweetheart. She's in good hands. Nolan stood at the emergency door, arms empty, chest hollow, his shirt damp from his grandmother's tears, his left sandal lost somewhere between the car and the door. Malcolm stopped beside him. The two stood there, side by side, the millionaire in a wrinkled suit and the boy with one sandal, staring at the white door behind which Dorothy had vanished. She'll be okay, Malcolm said. But it was more a plea than a certainty. Nolan did not answer. He simply closed his eyes and did what his grandmother would do. He prayed. The emergency waiting room was a narrow corridor with plastic chairs and a muted television in the corner. Nolan sat at the end of the row, bare feet on the cold floor staring at the double doors through which they had taken his grandmother. Malcolm sat beside him, his suit crumpled, his shoes stained with dirt. He no longer looked like a millionaire. He looked like a worried man. 2 hours passed without news. Nolan did not cry, did not speak, just sat there, lips moving now and then in silent prayer. Malcolm tried to speak 3 times. 3 times he stopped. What could he say? In the 3rd hour, the door opened. A doctor in a blue coat stepped out with a clipboard. Family of Mrs. Dorothy Silver. Nolan was on his feet so fast he nearly tripped over his own bare feet. "That's me. I'm her grandson." The doctor looked at him, then at Malcolm, who had risen behind him. "She had a congestive heart failure episode. We stabilized her, but the condition is serious. She needs to remain for treatment and observation." "Is she going to be okay?" The doctor hesitated, the hesitation of someone who knows medicine does not allow certainties. "We're doing everything we can, but she needs specialized follow-up and medication beyond what we have in the public system." Malcolm stepped forward. "Doctor, transfer her to St. Matthew's Hospital, cardiology wing, private room. I'll cover everything." The doctor studied him for a moment. "Are you family?" Malcolm looked at Nolan. The boy looked back. In those dark eyes there was a silent question, and a hope trying not to show. "I am," Malcolm said, and for the first time, the word was not a lie. "I'm family." The transfer happened that night. Nolan rode in the ambulance, holding his grandmother's hand. Dorothy had regained consciousness, but remained weak, eyes half closed, breathing aided by an oxygen mask. "Grandma, you're going to a better hospital." Dorothy squeezed his hand, faint but present, then closed her eyes and slept. The days that followed brought changes that arrived slowly, like water rising in a river after rain. At St. Matthew's Hospital, Dorothy received the treatment she needed. Cardiologists, tests, proper medication. The room had a window overlooking a garden, a comfortable bed, and space for Nolan to sleep beside her. Malcolm came every day. He did not send Bradley. He came personally. He sat beside the bed and stayed. Sometimes he talked about Patrick, about the early years. Sometimes he sat in silence, and that was what Dorothy appreciated most. "How you know what I missed most all these years?" she said one afternoon, her voice still weak but steadier than weeks before. "It wasn't money. It was presence. Knowing someone was there." Nolan watched everything with the attentive gaze of someone learning about the world at accelerated pace. He saw his grandmother improve each day, saw Malcolm change with each visit, and began to understand that people are more complicated than they seem, that the same man who humiliated him was capable of sitting beside his grandmother and learning to be gentle again. One morning, Harold Simmons appeared at the hospital, carrying the leather folder marked P.S. "How is she?" he asked Nolan. "Better. She might be discharged next week." "Thank God." He paused. "I need to speak with Malcolm." He found Malcolm in the cafeteria, drinking coffee from a plastic cup. Far from the Italian suits, he looked ordinary. "Patrick's documents prove his financial participation in the founding of your business. There's a legal basis for the heirs to make a claim." "I don't want a courtroom, Harold. I want to do this because it's right." "What do you propose?" "A trust fund, in Nolan's name. Education, health, whatever he needs. Managed by you to make sure I can't touch it. A fair amount. Not out of guilt, as Dorothy asked." Harold broke into a smile, the first open smile Malcolm had seen on the man's face. Patrick chose his friend well, even if it took the friend a while to realize it. It took far too long, but it arrived. Harold opened the folder and pulled out prepared documents. Malcolm signed each one without hesitation. The trust would cover Nolan's education through college, Dorothy's complete medical treatment, and a monthly allowance managed by Harold's firm. Not a fortune. Justice. Delayed, imperfect, but real. When they finished, Harold closed the folder and ran his fingers over the embossed initials. "Patrick told me once that the measure of a man isn't what he builds for himself, it's what he builds for others." He looked at Malcolm. "I think today you finally started building for others." Weeks later, Dorothy was discharged. She walked out slowly, leaning on Nolan on one side and a cane on the other, thinner, but with her eyes shining again. Malcolm waited at the door with the car, but they were not going to the faded yellow house. Not yet. "Where are we going?" Dorothy asked when she noticed the route was different. "There's something I need to show you." They stopped in front of a house on a quiet, tree-lined street in a simple but safe neighborhood. It was not a mansion. It was a single-story home painted white, with a garden in front and a porch with a rocking chair, 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, a new bathroom, and in the backyard, more than enough space for plant pots. "What is this?" Dorothy asked. "It's yours, and Nolan's." Silence lasted several seconds. Nolan stared at the house with his mouth slightly open. Dorothy gripped her cane so tightly her knuckles went white. "Malcolm, I told you I won't accept charity. It's not charity, it's the minimum. Patrick gave me everything he had so I could start. I'm returning a fraction. And before you refuse, Harold set it all up in Nolan's name. It's in the trust. It's his by right. Dorothy looked at her grandson. Nolan looked back at her, waiting. Not asking for anything. Not demanding. Simply waiting, the way he always had. She took a deep breath, looked at the house, at the garden, at the rocking chair on the porch. Is there room for my plants? Malcolm smiled. A true smile without armor. There's room for all of them. Dorothy walked to the gate, ran her hand along the white-painted wooden fence, looked inside, and for the first time in many years, she allowed herself to imagine a future without fear. Thank you, she said. Simple, without drama, but the weight of that word carried decades. The following week, Malcolm returned to Meridian National Bank. But he did not walk through the front door the way he always had. He stopped in the lobby and looked around as though seeing the place for the first time. The older security guard was at his usual post near the entrance. When he saw Malcolm stop and look at him, he straightened his posture by reflex. "Good morning, Mr. Reinhardt." Malcolm walked over. He read the name badge he had never bothered to read before. "Good morning, Gerald. How many years have you worked here?" The guard blinked, surprised. 18 years, sir. 18 years. And I never once asked your name." Malcolm extended his hand. "I'm sorry for that." Gerald shook the hand, bewildered, but there was gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, sir. Thank you for helping Nolan that day. You did what was right when I was doing everything wrong." At the reception desk, the clerk who had tried to turn Nolan away looked up and found Malcolm standing before the counter. She tensed, expecting a reprimand. "Good morning. I owe you an apology. When that boy came here, I should have listened. Instead, I intimidated and humiliated. You were not at fault, but you were forced to witness it. I'm sorry." The clerk was speechless for a moment. Then she murmured a barely audible thank you, her eyes glistening. Bradley appeared in the corridor, tablet in hand, ready for the day. "Mr. Reinhardt, you have a meeting at—" "Bradley, sit down for a moment." The assistant sat, nervous. "That photo you took, of the boy with the envelope on the floor, did you keep it?" "I did, sir." "Send it to me. I want it framed." Bradley's eyes widened. "Framed? To hang in my office, next to the photo I already have with Patrick, so I never forget who taught me what no business deal ever could." In the waiting area, seated in the same armchair as always, a woman with auburn hair was reading the newspaper. Malcolm recognized her. She was a long-time client, and she was the one who had shaken her head in disapproval the day he humiliated Nolan. He approached. "Excuse me. You were here the day a boy tried to deliver me a letter, and I treated him in a way that was shameful." The woman lowered the newspaper, surprised. "I was. I want you to know that boy taught me more in 5 minutes than I learned in 62 years, and I apologize for what you had to witness." She studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "You know, Mr. Reinhardt, I nearly closed my account that day, but I'm glad I didn't, because I'm seeing something I thought I'd never see. A powerful man saying he's sorry." Malcolm nodded. "It's harder than closing any deal. That's exactly why it's worth more." Months later, on a warm Saturday afternoon, Malcolm parked in front of the White House. He rang the bell. Nolan opened the gate. He looked different, wearing new sneakers, dressed in the uniform of a school Malcolm had enrolled him in, visibly taller, but the smile was the same. Open, without malice, without grudge. "Mr. Malcolm, come in. Grandma made cake." Dorothy was on the porch, in the rocking chair, the plant pots around her, more than before, an explosion of colors that transformed the entire facade. She was stronger. The right medication, proper nutrition, regular medical checkups, all of it made a difference. But what truly healed her, she insisted on saying, was peace. "Malcolm, come have coffee." He sat on the porch. Nolan brought cake and coffee in mugs that, this time, matched. The three of them sat there as though it were the most natural thing in the world. The millionaire, the grandmother, and the boy. "You know what I think sometimes," Dorothy said, gazing at the garden. "I think Patrick is watching all of this, and smiling." Malcolm felt his throat tighten. "I hope so. And I hope he forgives me for taking so long. My son forgave you before he left. The letter proved it. He never asked for revenge. He asked you to look after Nolan, because he believed that deep down you were still the friend he loved. And was I? You were hiding, underneath the money, the pride, the fear, but you were there." She smiled. And now you're here." Nolan had been listening in silence, eating cake. Then he looked at Malcolm and asked something he had been holding inside for a long time. "Mr. Malcolm, what was my father like?" The simple question brought down every remaining wall. Malcolm looked at this boy who had never met his father and felt the full weight of the responsibility he now carried. "Your father," he began slowly, "was the most generous man I ever knew. He shared everything. He laughed loud. He sang while he worked, even under blazing sun or pouring rain. He had the strongest hands I've ever seen, yet he was the gentlest person with everyone. And when he believed in someone, he believed completely. No reservations, no conditions." Nolan absorbed every word as though storing a treasure. "I want to be like him." "You already are, Nolan. When you walked into that bank in your torn sandals with that crumpled envelope and refused to leave, that was him. The same courage, the same dignity, the same heart." Dorothy wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron. "All right. Enough crying. Eat the cake before it gets cold." They laughed. All three. A laugh that held pain inside, but also relief. The laugh of people who had crossed something hard and come out whole on the other side. The sun was sinking slowly, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Dorothy's flowers seemed to glow in that light. Nolan looked at his grandmother, at Malcolm, at the house, at the garden. And he understood something no book could ever teach, that the paper he had carried into that bank did not hold a demand. It held love. The love of a father who, even while leaving, thought of others. And that love, crossing the years, the silence and the distance, had proved stronger than pride, more powerful than money, more lasting than any fortune. Because fortunes end, buildings crumble, empires fall. But the love you plant in others, that stays forever. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that dignity has no price and that it is never too late to do what is right. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because every week there's a new story waiting for you.